Thank you. That was a joyful little ditty. Hadn't heard that in a while. Thank you. And thank you for doing your job, Debbie, so faithfully, and for the reading that Celeste stepped in and did for us, and for Chris for lighting the candles. I took a picture of that, a video, didn't I? Yeah. So anyway, this month we're talking about the importance of commitment. And I got to repeat what William Hutchinson Murray said. Remember, he's the mountaineer from Scotland, and he said, the moment I shouldn't write these things in shorthand. The moment we definitely commit, then providence moves too. The moment we definitely commit to something, then doors will open. God will be there to uplift us. William Hutchinson Murray. So what do we do when we commit? We're touching in then to that inner self, that creator that created everything and everyone, that creator that experiences life in, through, and as us. We're touching into that when we make this commitment, and that's when these things happen that some people call miracles. One of the pioneers of what we call New Thought, Ralph Waldo Trine, says, "For what, let us ask, is a miracle? Is it something supernatural? It is supernatural only in the sense of being above the natural, or rather above that which is natural to man in his ordinary state. A miracle is nothing more or less than this." And so when people don't really know about that power within, and they see some kind of, well, some of the stuff that Celeste was reading about this morning, it seems like a miracle. And in our circles, we say, oh, how usual. We expect these things to happen because we know we've got this power within and we can speak our word and good can happen. But sometimes we can misunderstand. There can be misunderstanding about what is exactly a miracle. The story about a young nun, and she was a home health aide. She would go from home to home and help people with their needs. And she would drive into her appointment, and she runs out of gas. So she's pretty close to a gas station. And so she just walks up to the gas station, and she says, I need a gas can, and I'm going to walk back to my car and put some gas in. Well, he said, guy just came in, took our last gas can. He'll be back, if you want to wait. No, she couldn't wait. She had people to serve. So she thought, well, I'm going to go back to the car. Maybe there's something in the car that I can use as a container. So she goes to the car. She goes in the trunk. She finds a bedpan. Goes back to the gas station, fills the bedpan. Now, I understand. I thought bedpans were just flat, but now apparently they're bedpans that are kind of round, so you can carry gasoline in them. So she goes to the gas station with this bedpan. She fills it with gasoline. She goes back to her car, and as she's putting this gasoline from the bedpan into her car, there's a car that was slowly pulled up next to her, and two men were watching her do this. And one of them turned to the other guy, and he says, "I know it said that Jesus performed miracles like turning water into wine, but if that car starts, I'll be a believer for the rest of my life." So sometimes it's a very natural thing that happens that people tend to call a miracle. Could be a miracle is just changing our consciousness from what we deem to be impossible to looking at it as possibilities. I like to remember we live in a sea of possibilities. We really do, and we have a power that we can call on. There's evidence scientifically of what we call miracles. In 1970, a guy by the name of Carol Simonton, he was a radiation oncologist at Travis Air Force Base in Texas, and he had been working with people with tumors and they dissipated, and then all of a sudden they started coming back. And he's like, what's up with this? Something's going on. And he thought to himself, well, it has to be something psychological that's going on. And so he started working with imagery and deep relaxation. And do you remember the Pac-Man games? Chris does. She was a master at Pac-Man. But the Pac-Man little guy was going after somebody. And in his visualizations, the good cells were going after the bad cells to destroy the bad cells. That's kind of what he was doing. And it was very significant. It was having a significant effect on these people he was working with. And it made a difference. But the medical arena was not, in the 1970s, ready to embrace this. And so it kind of sat on the shelf for a while. Then, about a decade later, somebody else took an interest in it. And the guy's name was Gerald Jampolsky. Maybe you know that name. I knew it because I read one of his books called Love is Letting Go of Fear. And he was the director of the Center for Attitudinal Healing in California. And he really felt that this idea of using imagery and having people take responsibility for their own bodies, their own life, was going to make a difference. And last week, Debbie talked about the point of no return with your commitment. Remember that? And some of the things that happen is that it will help you manage your fear, it'll help you focus on your efforts, and it will have you take full responsibility for yourself and your experience. And he thought that taking full responsibility was a really important thing, because so many of us rely on what the doctor tells us. And I'll tell you a story later how I relied on what a doctor told me and then found out that maybe that wasn't quite the right diagnosis. But anyway, what he did then is he took a group of children that had been diagnosed with terminal illnesses like cancer and heart disease and leukemia, whatever other terminal diseases they had. 36 kids had been sent home to die, told, their parents, they probably got about 6 months. We have nothing we can help them with. They're going to die. And so he went with this group. And he thought to himself, well, what if they learned how to take responsibility for their own lives instead of, okay, the doctor said we're going to die, our parents said we're going to die. What if they said, what about me? Don't I have a say in my own life? And so he was teaching them about the Pac-Man stuff. He was doing relaxation with them. He was doing some artwork with them, self-expressive activities, inspiring and supportive stuff for them. He's working with the kids in this way. And all the while, the kids were still working with their doctors and doing what they were told to do on that front as well. So, as he did this, he was telling these kids, you can take responsibility for your part in this. Yes, the doctor told you this, your parents told you this, but now you. How about you? And he put the emphasis on quality of life, not quantity, not how long you're going to live, but how well you're going to live. And these kids got into it. And the gist of the story is every single one of those children lived. It's in the book, this book on commitment that Celeste read from. And it says in that book that a couple years later, these kids appeared on Phil Donahue's show. Some people don't remember Phil Donahue. He was old. but he was like Oprah, and so he'd have people on. He had these kids on, and this was 2 years after they were supposed to be dead, and they were there, they were happy, and they had really good attitudes. They weren't saying, yes, can you believe my parents? Can you believe the doctors? You know, they didn't do that. They didn't take that attitude. They were just grateful for their lives, and isn't that a great story? I mean, just makes the hair on my arm stand up. There's another book that I read called A Book of Miracles by Bernie Siegel. Some of you have already probably read some of his stuff. And he gives examples, and a lot of his examples have to do with a shift that takes place, a shift that leaves people with a feeling of peace, a feeling of calmness, a feeling of wellness, a feeling of unconditional love, that kind of stuff. There's several stories in his book. I think I based several sermons on that book a few years ago. It just had so much good stuff, and it reminds me of when my dad died and the experience my mom had. Us kids were up there, and we, clean out the closet and write the thank you notes and just spend some time together with my mom. And a couple years later, I said to my mom, you didn't seem to go through that horrible grieving process that a lot of your relatives and sisters-in-law did, where they, walked around ashen. It seemed like for years they were just beside themselves when they lost their partner. And granted, in those days, a lot of us lived on a farm, and our parents spent 24 hours a day together, so they were together a lot, and there was a real feeling of loss. And my mom and dad spent all the time together too. And I said, you didn't seem to go through that. And she said, and she didn't tell me this, I had to kind of, ask her about it. She said, well, the day you guys all left, I'm in the house alone for the first time. She said, I walked from the kitchen to the living room, and I said out loud to myself, what am I gonna do now? I can just hear her voice saying that. What am I gonna do now? And she said, just as she said that, she said, a wave of peace came over me. She said, I just knew right away, this is the peace that passes all understanding. She said that peace came over me, and it never left me, never left me. And what a wonderful blessing that was. So anyway, he tells examples like that too, where this happens. Now there's this lady named Natalie Palmer, and she was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And a week after the diagnosis, she was in the shower, and she's doubled over in pain. Just all of a sudden, she just doubled over in pain. And at that same time, a feeling of peace washed over her. Now, she didn't know my mother, so they weren't in cahoots on this story, but a feeling of peace washed over her. And she said, I felt peaceful, I felt calm, I felt a sense of forgiveness for myself and others. She said it was just a real shift that went on. And I believe, as I read that book, it seems to me when she was telling the story, she felt she audibly heard a voice saying to her, you're going to be okay. And so she lived the rest of her life. She committed herself at that time to better self-care, diet and exercise and prayer and meditation, forgiveness of herself and everybody else, and she became a survivor. Isn't this great? I mean, these things really happen. And I'm going to just tell you a story that happened to me. And that's probably 15 years ago, and I developed this little spot on my lip. It looked like a blood blister. And it was kind of growing, and people started saying, what's that on your lip? They'd ask about it. I was like, oh my gosh, this isn't fun, walking around with this thing on my lip that people are asking about. And so I went to a dermatologist, and she had a scientific name for it. I can't remember what she called it, but she said, it's the kind of thing that goes really deep. And if we'd cut it out, you'd look worse than you do today. Very encouraging. And so I elected not to have her do any cutting. And I thought, well, I guess it's just something I'm going to have to live with. But I didn't like it. I could, it's getting bigger. I could kind of feel it just when I sat I could feel it on my upper lip. I'm thinking, I don't like this. So I sat down one day in my living room and had a little talk with God, and I said, in the grand scheme of things, I know this is really nothing. But yet, I recall reading somewhere, probably in the Bible somewhere, there's no big or little with God. It's all the same. I think there's a song like that. It's all the same to me. And so I said, I just prayed. I said, I know it's a little thing, but I know that I've got that power of that very creator that created, that's within me. I'm just going to speak my words right here and right now that this little sucker gets dissipated to its nothingness somehow, some way. And I just let it go. I thought, well, I did, I spoke my piece, said my word. So the next day, I'm taking my mother to a dermatologist in Cambridge, Minnesota. Neither of us had ever been to this guy before, but as people get older, they get these moles and marks, whatever, on their face, and they like to check to make sure they're not cancerous. So she was going to get some of these things checked out. So we go to Cambridge and we go to the first floor, and she signs up, and go up to the second floor and see this dermatologist, and he gets out his little gun and he's zapping things all over the place. He's freezing or burning or whatever they do, and takes care of her. And I'm just sitting there watching, and he gets done and he looks at me and he says, "What's that on your lip?" And I said, "Well, dermatologist said it's some kind of thing that's really deep, and she didn't think it would be good idea to operate on it, blah, blah, blah." He said, he's sitting on this little rolling chair, and he said, "Can I look at it? Can I touch it?" And he rolls his little chair over by me, and he said, "I don't like to disagree with my cohorts, but," he said, "I think it's such and such and so, and I think I can take care of that in about 15 minutes. So I went downstairs, signed up, came back up, had him do his zapping, whatever he was doing, dissipated to its nothingness, just like that. Hey, yeah, and oh, how usual, how usual. I just spoke my word, and that's what happened. So I want to leave you with some ideas for some homework, some questions you might want to consider when you think about, for instance, how these 37 little kids got committed. What if we got committed in different areas of our life? What if we got committed in a relationship that's difficult, and we made a commitment to heal that relationship, to have a better relationship? What if we did that? How would that change your life? How about physically, if we changed our mind about how we take care of our bodies physically, and we did that with the kind of commitment that these 37 kids did? Let's think about that for your homework. And remember that when we make a commitment, oftentimes we're all gung-ho. I'm going to do this. This is a great idea. We're all gung-ho. And then, as time passes, kind of loses its appeal or its interest for us, and we simply forget about it. And I love this quote by Howard Thurman. He's an author of The Inward Journey. And here's what he says about it. And right after I do this, then we'll go into a spiritual mind treatment. So, despite the dullness and barrenness of the days that pass, if I search with due diligence, I can always find a deposit left by some former radiance. But I had forgotten. At the time it was full-orbed, glorious, and resplendent. I was sure I would never forget. In the moment of its fullness, I was sure that it would illumine my path for the rest of my journey. I had forgotten how easy it is to forget. There was no intent to betray what seemed so sure at the time. My response was whole, clean, authentic. But little by little, there crept in the dust, in the grit of the journey. Details, lower-level demands, all kinds of cross-currents, nothing momentous, nothing overwhelming, nothing flagrant, just wear and tear. If there had been some direct challenge, clear-cut issue, I would have fought it to the end and beyond. But a lot of times it's the dust and grit of the journey, and we forget. So, in the quietness of this place, surrounded by the all-pervading presence of God, my heart whispers, keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve, that in fair weather or foul, in good times or in tempest, in the days when the darkness and the foe are nameless or familiar, I may not forget that to which my life is committed. Keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve. That is Howard Thurman. And I would invite you now to get comfortable where you're sitting, and I'm going to do a spiritual mind treatment. Spiritual mind treatment is nothing more than an affirmative prayer. I'm going to say it in first person as though it's just for me, but it is also for you. And I know there is but one power in the universe. That power has a perfect solution to any perceived dilemma in life. That power is love and peace and joy, balance, order. It is all good. And it experiences life in, through, and as its creation, in, through, and as me, in, through, and as everyone. And even though I sometimes forget that I'm not alone, sometimes I feel alone, I now remember I have a partner, a perfect power within, perfect power that lives, moves, and has its being within me. And I can speak my word with authority and declare as those children declared, that we're responsible. We want to live. Or shift like the woman that Bernie Siegel talked about, where she was just overcome with peace and calmness and unconditional love, forgiveness, and healing. And I, too, can speak my word for the highest and best in every situation. And in this remembrance, I am grateful. Grateful that this is the way the law works. I speak my word, and it is done unto me as I believe. And I release these words now for perfect manifestation. So it is.